Jeremy Scahill from Dropsite News, and the breaking news is that as of 11:15 a.m. local time, the ceasefire and exchange of captives deal has taken hold between Hamas and the Palestinians of Gaza and Israel. And we are joined now by a member of Hamas's political bureau, a longtime political figure within the Hamas movement, Dr. Bassem Naim. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Naim.
Please, you are welcome.
So just in the big picture, what does this agreement represent for Hamas and the resistance movements in Gaza?
Thank you very much. First of all, we have to start to answer such a question. We have to start with October 7th. October 7th was for us as an act of defense. We were besieged for more than 17 years. We are occupied for more than 57 years in the 67 areas. We are, after the Nakba, 76 years. And we have always struggled for freedom and dignity and to get rid of the occupation, to have our own state. And we were never ready to accept improving the conditions of the prison. We are looking for freedom and dignity. And therefore, the first message of October 7th is that Palestinians are still there. They are struggling for their freedom and dignity and their own state. As a response to that, Israel has launched this horrific war, genocide, famine, supported by the West, mainly the Americans, unwavering support, with three main goals: to crush Hamas, to displace the people forcefully, the Palestinians, into another area, Sinai in Egypt, and to retrieve the soldiers, the captured Israelis, forcefully. Today, after signing this agreement, all these goals, Israel has failed to achieve any of them. Hamas is still there. Up to the last day there were attacks against the Israeli tanks and Israeli soldiers, and we have seen today in the streets of Gaza, Palestinians celebrating the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the middle of the cities, including some of the fighters. They were not able to retrieve the captured Israelis forcefully. It was only through the negotiations, and no one Palestinians have left Gaza Strip forcefully. I think, yes, we cannot say that we have defeated Israel as a superpower in the region, but also at the same time, we can say that the resistance was so steadfast, so committed, that Israel was not able to defeat it. I think this is a good starting point for the next stage, where Palestinians have to struggle for their political project, which is an independent, self-sovereign state. We have, from day one in the negotiations, raised 5 points to be achieved. First of all, only the negotiations about the prisoners have to be only through negotiations. The return of all displaced people to their houses in the north, the withdrawal of the forces from the Gaza Strip, and a permanent ceasefire, opening the borders, allowing all the needs to get into. I think today we were able, despite of the very heavy prices, very costly negotiations, we have achieved all these goals.
You know, I'm sure you listen to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also you're following closely what is being reported in the Israeli press. And the spin that is being put on this right now by Netanyahu is that he has essentially a side deal with both outgoing President Joe Biden and President-elect Donald Trump, that Israel can essentially view this as a one-phase deal where they can try to get as many of their captives released from Gaza as possible and then continue the war. Trump's incoming national security advisor, Mike Waltz, said the other day on American television that he still believes and supports the goal of totally destroying Hamas. How do you prevent or deal with this situation where the Israelis are saying, essentially, the deal we signed is not really the actual deal and we're going to continue the war?
Look, we have no idea about such side deals. Maybe this is a hidden agenda between the two parties. we are dealing with what we have signed, 3 phases deal, have to end with a permanent ceasefire. We are committed to this deal. We will exert the maximum efforts to give this deal a chance to succeed. We are looking for how to prevent the war again, how to protect our people. We will do the best to protect this deal. What kind of side deals they have done, this is their business. But what I can say here, first of all, the American administration led by Biden, which we consider complicit, directly complicit in the genocide, they have used all what they can. They have dropped nearly 8 atomic bombs on Gaza Strip, more than 500,000 tons of explosive material and weapons reached Israel from America. More than $60 billion reached Israel from America. 4 times veto in the UN Security Council. I think they haven't spared any tool, anything to help the Israelis to achieve their goals, but they have failed. I don't think that any other administration, including Trump administration, can do more than what Biden administration have done. Second, I think again, Palestinians who struggled or who fought along the last 15 months and were ready to pay all the prices to defend their cause, to defend their freedom and dignity and right of return, they are still there. They are still there and they are still ready to continue the struggle and to pay the prices. Therefore, even if they return back, I'm sure our people will continue the struggle because we believe that this is a just cause, a just struggle, and we have all the guaranteed right by the international law to resist the occupation by all means, including armed resistance. What we are looking for is an independent state. If we can get it politically or through a UN resolution, UN Security Council resolution, this is the preferable way. We are not looking for to fight only for fighting. We are looking how to protect the future of our children. If we can reach this politically or diplomatically or legally, yes, this is preferable. But if not, I think all Palestinians are still ready to continue this struggle. And I have here to say that it was not because the American media and the Western media have always talked about Hamas and Israel and the fightings between Hamas and Israel. It is not about Hamas. It is about the Palestinian people because the Palestinians are struggling for these goals now for around 100 years, since 30s, last century. Now it is with Hamas. 20 years ago, it was with Fatah. 30, 40 years ago, it was with PFLP, and so on and so on. Therefore, it is not about Hamas. If you crush Hamas and Hamas disappear, which will not happen, you will have a new generation of other Palestinians who are ready to continue this track of struggling for their freedom and dignity.
Well, and of course,
here I have
Secretary of State Antony Blinken, when he gave one of his farewell addresses, acknowledged that the number of fighters joining the armed resistance has grown, not shrunk, since the war began on October 7th.
Look, Hamas politically is representing around 40% to 50% of the people on the ground, because Hamas is not only a military wing. Hamas have social activities, have educational activities, religious activities, medical activities. This is a big political movement with different branches, different activities, and the arm wing is only one out of different activities. Therefore, Hamas will not disappear. Hamas will not evaporate, even if they crush the armed capabilities. Hamas is a political movement with a clear political goal, how to get rid of the occupation. And therefore, Hamas is still there. But I mean, if you go for election, Hamas might win with 40%, 45%, maybe 50%. But when you ask Palestinians about their stances when it comes to resistance, when it comes to how to get rid of the occupation, more than 90% are supporting Hamas. This is the polls done by neutral bodies, that more than 90% of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and in the diaspora are supporting the vision of Hamas, how to get rid of the occupation. I mean, politically, socially, maybe 40% of the Palestinians are adopting the ideology of Hamas. But when it comes to the occupation, how to get rid of this, 90% are still supporting Hamas. We have here to say that, what do you expect? Gaza Strip is composed, the people in Gaza Strip, Palestinian in Gaza Strip are 2.4 million Palestinians. 70% of them are below 18. Around 70% are below 18. I mean, 70 or less are children. If these children today, after ceasefire, they have no house, no school, no hospital, no mosque, no church, no playground, no infrastructure, no water, no medicine, no food. And the Israelis continue, supported by the Americans, to commit all these crimes. And these young men with this desperate present situation or current situation and desperate future, and they saw no horizon, no better future, and at the same time they have guns everywhere. What do you expect from a young man who has no vision about a better future, no school, no hospital, no water, he will continue fighting. Therefore, we have said it many times, we have to reach a ceasefire, we have to lift the siege, to open the borders, to help the Gazans to rebuild their life again from scratch, to rebuild schools and hospitals and mosques and churches and infrastructure, and to get their basic needs, to travel freely, to move around the world, and then to go for a political solution for this just cause. Without having a political solution for the Palestinian cause, based on international law, I think it is a matter of time when we will witness the next round of confrontation or escalation. It is not about Hamas, it is not about Gaza, it is about national goals. It is a matter of time. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, I don't know. No one can bypass the Palestinian. No one can overcome the Palestinian. All these dreams of normalizations or integrating Israel in the region without solving the Palestinian cause, it is illusions.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Welcome to this special breaking news edition of Judging Freedom with our friend Max Blumenthal, who not only is the news analyst and our great historian, he is, as you will see in a moment, the news maker. Max, I deeply appreciate your coming to the camera for us, especially in light of what you went through earlier today, which the audience will see in a few minutes. Before we get to what happened to you at the State Department, before we get to your analysis of the lies articulated by the Secretary of State as he was giving a swan song, the ceasefire negotiated and supposedly agreed to between Israel and Hamas, as you understand it, is it a defeat for Israel?
It's I wouldn't qualify it as a defeat. I think tactically, Israel has suffered a number of losses and there is no strategy. And we are, what October 7th did was unleash a protracted war that accelerated the process that has been developing in Israel, Palestine, and in the region for many years. But to call this a defeat would be, I don't know, to look at it with rose-colored glasses, because tens of thousands of lives, and I think we're going to see that many tens of thousands more were lost under the rubble that were not known before. Once reporters and investigators are able to get in, those lives should have never been lost. The destruction of Gaza, even the loss of many of the hostages and captives should have never happened were it not for the savagery of Israel's patron in Washington, the Blinken, Biden, McGurk administration, which wanted to see this war go on as long as possible because it wanted to see how much damage Israel could do in the region to reverse the trend of multipolarity, the rise of the resistance axis. And they did succeed in doing a whole lot of damage, but the human damage is immeasurable.
Right.
And that was part of Israel's objective too. So I can't call this a defeat, but it certainly was not this was not a victory for Israel. And they certainly failed to achieve what Netanyahu promised, which was total victory.
Will Smotrich and Ben-Gvir leave the government if the cabinet and the Knesset accept this? I don't know how the Knesset could accept it if they vote against it, but let's just say the Knesset accepts it and the cabinet accepts it. Do they leave Netanyahu high and dry and confronting re-election while he's on trial for bribery?
Well, I think one reason Netanyahu was able to do this deal was also why he was able to extend the war, which was that he replaced his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, with Israel Katz, who is a sycophant, and he strengthened his coalition and expanded his coalition. And so Ben-Gvir and Smotrich don't have the same hold over Netanyahu that they had before. It is worth noting, in light of the ridiculous comments made at the State Department over the past 48 hours, that it was Hamas's fault every time for sabotaging negotiations, that Ben-Gvir has now come out and boasted that again and again, he personally prevented a ceasefire deal by undermining it through his power in the coalition.
Got it. Before we play these two very, very dramatic tapes, one involving you and one involving your colleague and friend Sam Husseini, set the stage for us. What was happening at the State Department when they dragged you out? What was Secretary Blinken saying? And before we run the tape, what message were you attempting to get across to him and to your fellow journalists?
Well, we'll discuss the message after watching it. Tony Blinken came in today for his final press conference and a curtain call, victorious curtain call, kind of a victory lap to tout his Middle East policy, pat himself on the back for a ceasefire deal that would have never happened if Trump were not coming into office. We got word early, actually at around 9:30 a.m. And so I raced in there and managed to get in some questions to Tony Blinken that I've always wanted to ask him I had to ask the questions under duress. I would have never been called on. No dissenters are called on by Blinken or his press secretary. And one of the purposes as well is to hold him accountable for what I consider to be the Holocaust of our time. You know, we may not get Nuremberg 2.0 in the near term, but he needs to at least feel uncomfortable and have this disgusting curtain call ruined by people asking legitimate fact-based questions about how he allowed this to happen.
Here is you challenging the Secretary of State and his people, getting you out of the room. Blinken, number one, Chris.
I have even greater respect, even greater appreciation for you asking the tough questions, for you holding us to account. Being on the receiving end, sometimes that's not always the most comfortable thing, not always the most enjoyable thing, but it is the most necessary thing.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in
I'm
May?
happy to address questions.
We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address questions when we get a chance. Thank you.
Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow
I'm happy to address your questions when we get to questions. Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating
Yeah, I have a
with
statement.
fascism.
Yeah, I have a statement to make. Thank you.
You waved the white flag before Netanyahu.
Questions at the end.
You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance to finish my statement. Thank you.
Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt, you smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What happened to you after they pushed you out of the room? Were you confronted by police?
There was a police officer who was looking for me, and I complied with him, and they walked me off the premises, and he said, don't come back today. And I said, well, you won't see me for the rest of this administration.
Why did you okay, why did you feel the need to go into his face? Do you think he knowing who you are and anticipating what you were going to ask, would ever have called on you?
No one ever gets held accountable in our society for the worst, most titanic crimes. No one was held accountable for the financial crash, the housing crisis. No one is held accountable for the Iraq War. No one is held accountable for any of the crimes that our military and financial elite carry out. And Tony Blinken now is uniquely responsible for the human rights catastrophe of my generation. And he's someone that was in DC when I was growing up. I knew people who are close to him growing up. He's someone who represents himself as a Jew, as I am. He's someone who has broadcast and boasted about his personal ancestral ties to Israel through his father-in-law, Samuel Pissar, who was an Israel lobbyist in France, and his grandfather, Nathan, who is also an Israel lobbyist who actually helped found the apartheid state of Israel. And so he needed to be challenged by me personally, face to face. And I also wanted to confront him for the horror that he brought to the lives of the people of Gaza in the name of defending the cause of Zionism that he holds so dear to his heart. I wish that he could hear the screams and the cries of the children of Gaza. I wish he could have been confronted by my friend Rifat Al-Arir, the great writer and poet who was killed in his home for social media posts in a targeted assassination with US-made bombs. But Tony Blinken wasn't even listening to his own staff in the Middle East Bureau at the State Department who were bringing him evidence of US weapons being responsible for this Holocaust. The whistleblowers had been ignored. 60 Minutes held a report for 8 months featuring the State Department whistleblowers. So it really fell on our shoulders, any reporter who was able to get in that briefing and send that message to Tony Blinken. But for me, this was personal. It was personal as an anti-Zionist Jew. It was personal as someone who had close relationships with people who were slaughtered thanks to the soft-handed Eichmann-like signature of Tony Blinken. And it was personal because I had the ability to get into that room. I have a responsibility to speak on behalf of the 300 or so Palestinian journalists who were slaughtered by US-made weapons sent by Tony Blinken, Joe Biden, and Brett McGurk. And I did what I could because I don't believe in this society that Tony Blinken will be held accountable as he should in Nuremberg 2.0. And that's what Sam Husseini called for, as you'll see, is him to be sent to The Hague.
Jeff, on this question about the U.S. and the Middle East, to switch to the Middle East a little bit. So you've said that the U.S. is delusional, or U.S. policymakers are delusional in their view of, grand strategy, in their view of a unipolar world that will last, in their view, forever. That seems to be the thinking. But what if we shifted to the Middle East and the perspective of the Middle East, where when people looking from the Middle East, will often say, well, but the U.S. is the dominant power. It has this military capacity you've talked about to bludgeon people into, or at least to try to bludgeon people into submission. So how does your thinking about U.S. delusion square with the reality that we see in the Middle East, which is essentially quiescent regimes, the changes in Syria, the crushing of the Palestinians? Yes, and of course there's resistance as well. So I'm wondering how that works in on the one hand, and on the other hand, the question of Israel. I mean, is Israel an outpost of the U.S., or is there something different about the Israeli-U.S. relationship?
I think both the U.S. and Israel are delusional.
about the long term. It's true. In the short term, they can kill a lot of people, kick the shit out of a lot of people. And the U.S.-Israeli alliance has been nonstop war. The best way to understand Netanyahu is very simple, in my view, which is that his political movement, the Likud, is based on one idea, never a Palestinian state, and therefore Israeli control permanently over the land from the river to the sea. And that actually is the charter of the Likud from the very start. The idea that this is a Palestinian chant, not an Israeli chant, is a little bit of the twist of our narratives, but it's the Likud that talks about from the river to the sea, of course, and that's the goal. Then Netanyahu came into power in 1996, and what was the strategy? The strategy was, well, we're going to keep everything. They're not going to like it. There will be resistance. There will be Hamas. There will be Hezbollah. There will be other military resistance. Don't fight them per se. Just overthrow the governments that support them. Because as Netanyahu, I think, rightly said in the 1990s, it's not the militants or what they call the terrorists that are the ones that are the danger. It's their state backers. War is a big business. War is not an insurrection. Sorry. No matter what people think, war is an organized state activity that costs tens or hundreds of billions of dollars and depends on advanced technologies. War is a big game of big players. So Netanyahu's idea was, well, yeah, we don't like Hamas and so forth, but that's not the real story. The real story is the regimes that back it. And I have always been struck by what Wesley Clark told us many, many years ago about his visit to the Pentagon in September 2001. 7 wars in 5 countries, in 5 years, excuse me. That list came from Israel. That wasn't a U.S. Of course, Paul Wolfowitz and Doug Feith and others are part of this strong U.S.-Israel right-wing alliance. And the 7 wars, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Libya. We've done the list. Netanyahu's had 6 out of 7 so far, and he's gunning for the 7th. And he may get it, the war with Iran. So that's the basic idea. I think, pretty clear. Most big ideas don't get hidden from view. People like Netanyahu like to write books about them, bragging about what they're going to do. And Netanyahu's bragged about taking down the Middle East. He shows us maps at the UN of the good guys, which are the ones with U.S. military bases, and the bad guys, which are the ones that support the Palestinians. And we're just going to completely uproot the bad guys. Now, what has happened? What has happened is, yes, they've made a killing field across the Middle East. No results in terms of really remaking the Middle East. I quoted Tacitus recently. They made it a desert and called it peace. What have they done? Is Lebanon at peace? Is Syria at peace? Is Somalia at peace? Is Sudan at peace? Is Libya at peace? Is Iraq at peace? No. These are killing fields. These are bloodbaths. These are not normal states. This is the handiwork of the United States and Israel by design. But it doesn't produce the political outcomes. Now, here we are in the midst of a genocide going on in Gaza. On the one side, it is, I can't call it impressive exactly, but it is a fact that almost the entire world understands this is a genocide and says so, and bemoans it. And you have statements by every group imaginable by the Arab League, by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, by the G20, by the BRICS, by the UN General Assembly, and by the UN Security Council, but for the US veto against what's happening. So public opinion, such as it is nearly universally aghast at this, as it should be. But it goes on every day. And this is part of the drama and the mystery. This is the first prime-time, full video genocide in history, where we watch it every day. We watch the gloating of the Israeli Defense Forces. We watch the genocidal statements of the Israeli leaders. We watch the shameless, pathetic performance of American politicians. And one thing I'll say, on January 20, at least I'm going to celebrate the departure of Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. Biden hasn't been there for a long time mentally, but these lieutenants of his have really done a job. They are really nasty or stupid or some combination of the two. So all to say, what does this add up to? Well, you can kill a lot of people, but in the end, this is not making, even forcing a long peace. And I don't believe personally that Israel survives this. I think it could survive and should survive a two-state solution. That's what I've advocated for decades and what I continue to advocate even for today, knowing all of the practical challenges. But I don't think it survives as the great regional empire in the Middle East. Zealots have a real way of self-destruction, and this is zealotry at work in Israel.
But when you say Israel can't survive, Jeff, I mean, do you mean it as, are you talking sort of ideologically? Are you talking ethically, morally? Or are you talking, since you're talking about power, do you mean in terms of what it's doing now will ultimately be unsustainable in the sort of medium to long future?
Yeah, but I should define my terms. I'm saying if we're looking ahead a quarter century from now, will greater Israel be the reality? Meaning, will there be a state of Israel that controls all the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria, if these people have their wish, all the way to the Euphrates, because that's what it just says in Genesis. Do I believe that that's what the Middle East will look like in 25 years? No.
But why do you assume that the Israelis want peace as opposed to domination?
They don't want peace.
Exactly. So
no, that's the relevance of Tacitus, Osama. They made a desert and called it peace.
Right. They don't want peace, or they want peace on their terms. But in the end, Israel will not determine the state of affairs of the Middle East, nor will the United States alone, though it thinks that it will. In the end, it just won't be a Jewish state acting as a regional empire. It's not in the cards. It violates too many international laws, too much global opinion, too much even primitive ethics, not to kill tens or hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. Most people believe that, actually.
We agree with you 100%. I think the world agrees with what you're saying. But the question is, like, when you say two-state solution, could we push you a little bit on that and ask you why, after all that has passed, should anyone advocate for? I mean, the two-state solution in a sense is gone because the Israeli colonization of the West Bank and Jerusalem is so extensive. Why not advocate for a single state, given the fact that we're talking about hypotheticals here, a single state where everyone has equal rights? Why should anyone be advocating for two states, one of which would still be, in theory, a supremacist state?
Because we are one vote away from a two-state solution that could end killing. It wouldn't end this question of whether the two states should become one state, whether there should be a federation, whether in the end it will become one state. And I think that it may well become that way. I have no problem with it myself becoming that way. But I believe in political terms, there was a vote, basically 170 in favor of two-state solution in the General Assembly, and a few opposed, essentially the U.S., Israel, Micronesia, Nauru, Paraguay, Argentina, and depending exactly on the vote, sometimes Czech Republic and Hungary, sometimes not. In other words, about 95% of the world has said two-state solution. The G20 this year said it. The BRICS said it. The OIC said it. The Arab League said it in Bahrain last year in Riyadh. The United States is, from a juridical point of view, the only blockade to that, not Israel. Israel cannot veto two states. I am not calling for a peace process, by the way. We've had a peace process for 57 years. I'm not calling for a peace process. I'm not calling for negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That is the least relevant, conceivable approach. I'm calling for the United States to change its veto, to be aligned with international law, global diplomacy, and the overwhelming opinion of the American people. So this is what I'm calling for. Now, what does that mean in practice? With a sovereign Palestinian state on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, with control over the Islamic holy sites, with the capital in East Jerusalem, it means that there will be a state of Palestine and a people of Palestine and a place for Palestinians to live. Will it mean eventually one state? It could very well, by the way. It could mean a confederal arrangement in the future. It could mean two states that hate each other for the next 30 years, but don't kill each other. But to my mind, it would mean the end of this Israeli, I don't know, so many words come to mind, but this zealotry and this militarism with the world saying no more, Likud, no, there's going to be a Palestinian state whether you like it or not. This is not your choice. This is about international law, and this is about peace for all the rest of us. Thank you. And you just have to live with it.
Sorry, Jeff, can I just to push you a little bit more on this? From where I stand, there seems to be a bit of a contradiction, because we're saying that there's delusion and that we have this U.S. now under Trump, but under Biden and Trump, and you've argued for a long time that there's this kind of continuity, especially certainly when it comes to the Israelis and it comes to the Middle East. So on the one hand, the U.S. is getting even more pro-Israeli officially, not in public terms, but in official terms, more weapons. Even now, Biden is sending another $8 billion. Even now, it's sort of as his goodbye gift to Netanyahu. Even now, to this day, we have this. We have the kind of Trump appointments that are coming in are these evangelical types, these people that believe in greater Israel, people that all of this. And on the other hand, you're still coming back to saying, well, we need to get the U.S. to remove its veto. What is it that's changed? I mean, how are we defining it and analyzing it so incredibly well and so realistically, in a sense, and at the same time coming back to a policy that says, okay, but still we're going to ignore all this and we still want the ideal solution, which I agree, most people in the world might want that. But if the U.S. continues like this, what is change? Where do you see the change that's going to get the U.S. to remove its veto?
If you ask me, is what I'm advocating likely to happen? I'm I'm perfectly prepared, as I have been throughout my whole life, to say what I believe, even if I don't think it's likely to happen, because I think it's the right thing to do. So I just want to clarify, I'm not making a prediction that this is about to happen. It might. The argument I'm making inside the U.S. is that Donald Trump wants to make America great again. Well, maybe the first step would be American sovereignty, because I don't believe any of this has been in America's interest. In other words, this isn't some great accomplishment of the U.S. To have led to $7 trillion of debt and mass bloodshed and diplomatic isolation of the United States through 6 wars that Netanyahu has called for. I'm trying to say this is not in America's interest. It also happens to have the, let's say, the added feature, which doesn't matter very much, I admit, but the American people don't want us to continue being accomplices to Israel's genocide. I say that it doesn't much matter because America is not a democracy in any operational sense when it comes to foreign policy, or much else, by the way. It's a highly corrupted plutocracy. But when it comes to foreign policy, it's not even remotely a democratic institution. We're lied to every day. There's no deliberation. There's no attempt to discern the public views of issues, none at all. It's completely in the hands of the National Security Council and the CIA. We don't know, again, whether the president's been in the loop on much of anything for a long time because he's mentally, at least partly, incapacitated. But my point is, this is not in American interest. So it's a glimmer of hope. If you ask me, is it more likely to say, yes, we'll have 2 states than to say this coming year we'll go for the 1-state solution? I would say yes. But maybe I'm, playing with numbers that one has a 10% or 5% or 3% chance and one has a 0.01% chance. So one may be much more likely, but still highly unlikely. But I'm trying to go with something that at least has a chance this coming year to stop the killing, stop the bloodshed, put a floor under what is now a Palestinian freefall. Also, by the way, look around the Arab world. Of course, some states are still in diplomatic recognition of Israel, which I can't really understand. I find it this was the time to break diplomatic relations, in my view. Genocide is a good reason for that, but they didn't do it. And they didn't do it because the U.S. military bases are there and for other reasons that we've talked about. But even those states say 2-state solution. Some of them say it actually pretty firmly right now. If the Arab world, maybe this, I don't know if you'll laugh or cry or whatever, but if the Arab world actually got its act together and said, we have leverage, we've waited 100 years for that. It hasn't happened yet. But if it did happen, that really could change things, by the way. If Donald Trump heard clearly from the entire Arab world, and it's not impossible, look, don't play games anymore with us. Don't bribe us with your F-35s. Don't bribe us. Don't talk about the Abraham Accords and what it's going to mean and try to pull us apart one more time. Our position is the following. And that's our position. And accept it or don't accept it, but that's our position. We've taken it to Beijing. We've taken it to Moscow. We've taken it to Brasilia. We've taken it to South Africa. That's our position. You know what? That would actually make a difference. It would make a difference.
Sorry, so much of what you're saying here is so admirable in terms of, pursuing a noble ambition of peace and so on, and obviously we share that ambition towards peace and justice. But part of what's happening, and you put your finger on it too, is there's also increasingly a gap between U.S. popular opinion and the policymaking establishment run by the lobby in Washington. Our last guest before you was John Mearsheimer, incidentally. So we're talking all about this. But the crisis we see on our campuses, you're at Columbia, I'm at UCLA. I mean, like our campuses are, I know your campus is like a, fenced off from the world now. Our campus is essentially patrolled by riot police. This level of suppression that's going on now, it seems to me that more and more people are aware of what's going on at the popular level, certainly on college campuses. So isn't this the best moment to say what we want to pursue is what we really believe in, at least what I really believe in, and I think my brothers share this too, is a one democratic and secular state where all citizens can be equal. And like, why don't we, like, if we're pushing for an ideal in the face of viciousness and violence and genocide, why don't we push for a true democratic, just, equality for all kind of situation, rather than a two-state solution that we all know is gone. And even if it were realized, it would still leave the refugees out of the picture. It would leave the Palestinian citizens inside pre-48 or pre-67 as second-class citizens. So yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
I have no problem with that. I'm taking a different approach, but it's a perfectly reasonable approach, you're saying. My approach is, again, all of it is against the odds. Your approach, my approach, believe me, it's against the odds. You know it too. But my approach is change one vote because it's in the U.S. national interest to change that vote, and go with the fact that we are with the overwhelming sentiment of humanity to act now. So that's why I'm taking the approach that I am. But I understand what you're saying completely. I don't disagree with it either.
We're definitely going to talk more about the military embargo, but before we get to that, I do want to ask you a little bit more, just to follow up on the discussion we had with you when you were last with us in June, and you told us about the impact that the war and genocide in Gaza have been having on Israeli society economically and socially. That was 7 months ago, and in the meantime, there was also the war with Lebanon, the Iranian missile strike on October 1st, and of course, the ongoing strikes from Ansarullah in Yemen. I want to show you a recent headline and get your reaction to it. And this is just from 2 weeks ago, from December 31st, where we have the Times of Israel that has this article, which states, quote, an unusually large number of Israelis left the country over the course of 2024, the Central Bureau of Statistics said, fueling a sharp slowdown in population growth amid a dragged-out war and domestic political turmoil. The article also says that Israel is including more than 200,000 foreign workers in its population figures for the first time. Is that an effort to hide Israel's population decline? What can we read from these figures? Are they like Israel's casualty figures, where they're massaged, and or are they telling a true story? What's going on? And more broadly as well.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of propaganda, a lot of massaging of the facts by the various Israeli institutions that are collecting the data. But in addition to this, there's also just a lack of capacity, which I think is very interesting, that the Israelis just don't know. I mean, a lot of people that I know, that I'm in touch with, that have decided to leave Israel are not, canceling all of their contracts, saying goodbye to all their friends, taking a one-way ticket and just leaving Israel behind. They don't know what the future will bring, especially people with families. So they sign a long-term lease on some apartment in Greece or in Portugal or in Cyprus, and they say, well, we'll send our kids to school in that country for 1 year, then we'll see what happens. Let's still pay some of our social taxes in Israel so we don't lose our benefits. So as long as you pay those taxes, you're not listed as having left the country. You're counted as only on vacation. So those numbers are not even showing. So this is happening. I don't know if we can talk about a decline in the population, because overall the number of people, the number of well, we have in an apartheid situation. It's a very complex situation. It's not just the citizens, it's also the residents, it's also people who are not recognized by the authorities and undocumented and so on. There are many different levels. In East Jerusalem, residents are officially supposed to be part of a territory that Israel has annexed, but nevertheless they don't have citizenship. But I don't think that we are seeing a decline in the overall population. The important thing is, who are the people who are living? What are their characteristics? And the people who are leaving are first and foremost the people who have the opportunity to leave. Not necessarily that they have the political inclination, but rather just that they have the education, the money, the connections, a job offer overseas. Maybe they work in an international company and they can ask for a relocation or transfer within the company. Those people belong to the elite. Those people are the upper middle class, and they are the engine of Israel's economy. They are the ones who fuel the high-tech sector. Also, they are the ones who fuel the Israeli military strength, which relies not on foot soldiers with guns, but relies on intelligence and on high-tech weapons and complicated guidance system and surveillance, and all that stuff is developed by companies staffed by those upper middle class people who are leaving in large numbers. There was recently the PISA education results, which is an international testing system to test various competencies among school children. And Israel dropped dramatically in both mathematics and sciences because also the best teachers are leaving. And the families and as the education system is anyway in a free fall, really, the tech companies are saying, well, if this is the next generation of students in schools who are and in universities that will graduate and will want to work for us, we're going to need to find our workforce elsewhere. So that's part of the wave of divestment that we see. So I don't think it's just the question of what is the population trend, but it is a capitalist economy. A capitalist economy is always about what is the prospects for the future. Nobody makes an investment unless they think the investment will bring a profit in the future. And if you think the future is bleak, and most Israelis think the future is very bleak for the Israeli economy, then why make an investment? So if the Israeli own population, when they go to the bank and say, I want to make sure that my pension fund or my insurance funds or whatever, my personal investments are not invested in the Israeli economy. I have no faith in the Israeli economy. Please invest abroad. And so many people have done that the trust funds, which are operated within Israel for those kinds of investments, have shifted more than 50% of their investments abroad. And ironically, this created the image as if the Israeli economy is actually not affected so much by the war, because then they got dividends in foreign currency. They got a lot of dollars and euros from those investments they made abroad. They brought them to Israel and converted them to the Israeli currency, thereby sustaining in a very artificial and unsustainable way the Israeli currency. But as the cost of living in Israel skyrockets, these profits evaporate very quickly. So people who have no choice and they have to stay because they don't have another passport, they don't speak English or other languages, they don't have good education, or a lot of people who have sick parents that they need to take care of and so on. So they have to stay. They see their daily cost of living going up and up, out of control. the government is going to increase taxes, raise the prices even more through consumer taxes. A much more impressive headline that I've seen in the Israeli news this week was that the whole war was actually funded with debt. So the resources that Israel used in order to finance the war is all based on debt. And it's all about the hype that the Israeli economy has, which allows them to continue to sell bonds to investors who are stupid enough, sorry for saying so, to believe that if you buy a 10-year bond from Israel, you're ever going to see your money back. This is just a way to throw your money into the garbage, because there's no way Israel will ever repay this debt. And the Minister of Finance, who is also a fanatic settler, one of the and a very religious person, he believes, that victory will still come because Trump was sent by God to save Israel. And Smotrich believes that people can continue to believe to buy into those lies that he's telling, that the deficit is not so bad, that the debt is still manageable. Members of his own ministry are leaving in frustration because they don't want to be caught when this whole house of cards falls down. They don't want to be part of it. The system is very much rotten from within. But once again, if you allow me, I want to connect it to the military embargo.
Please,
because I think that one amazing thing that we see with the military embargo now is it's so hard to measure if the military embargo is really working or not, and how fast is it growing. But one very sure way of measuring it is the response within Israel. And according to Israeli law, the government has to propose a budget, and the Knesset, the parliament, has to authorize it by October for the next year. And if they don't do it by the end of October, the government falls and they go to elections. So they haven't actually passed the budget in the Knesset yet from last October. They just changed the law and gave themselves more time. We are now already in 2025. The budget is not really authorized yet. But in the draft of the budget, which is supposed to be discussed, they have said they're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, which they don't have, in order to build a military industry in Israel to replace all of the weapons, ammunition, and materials that they cannot get because of the military embargo. And this is amazing. First of all, just a side note here, you cannot build materials, raw materials, no matter how many factories you make. If you don't have the raw materials, you're not going to get the materials. You have to import them. But of course, this is a message to the public. We're going to do everything locally. They're going to build a TNT plant, which will be an environmental disaster. And I really think that this is, I hope they never have time to do it, because this is Palestine and the Palestinian land, and Israel has no right to pollute the land that belongs to Palestinians. But the whole military industry that they're trying to develop, where they're saying, okay, if we cannot get the engines that we need for our vehicles and the components for the drones or for the F-35 planes, we don't have enough rifles, we don't have enough artillery, we're going to build everything domestically, no matter what it costs. But this shows how short a historical memory people have in Israel, because this whole war, this whole genocide, has been a rerun, from the Israeli point of view, a rerun of the War of 73. Right? The War of 73 started as a surprise attack against Israel on October 6th, and then 50 years later and 1 day later, it was October 7. And once again, Israel was caught by surprise and underestimated their enemies and overestimated their own intelligence capabilities. And there was a big crisis. But the War of 73, there's something that in my research, I've investigated it a lot, because The War of 73 came just 6 years after the occupation of 67. Before 67, the biggest supplier of weapons to Israel was France. This was before the US major financing, military financing to Israel. France was the biggest supplier. And Israel conquered all of Palestine and also parts of Egypt and Syria using French weapons, mostly. That's a not very well-known fact. After the war, France said, if Israel is not going to withdraw from the territory that it conquered and occupies, then we will impose a military embargo. And Israel had no intention of withdrawing, of course, still doesn't. And France did impose a military embargo. And then the response in Israel was, well, who needs them anyway? We'll produce everything locally. The same thing that we're seeing now. And they did spend a lot of money, and they built this massive industry to build everything in Israel, the tanks, the airplanes, the ships, the artillery. And then the War of 73 happened and started, and the Syrian and Egyptian armies in that war were armed with Soviet weapons, which were far superior to the Israeli domestically made weapons. The Israelis, the Uzi submachine gun that Israel is so proud of, had a range of 100 meters. The Soviet Kalashnikov had 400 meters range. So infantry battles were completely one-sided. And the Israelis were about to be wiped out. I mean, the Israeli forces were about to be wiped out until the US came and gave them American weapons, and that changed the course of the war. Now it seems that Israel has forgotten this completely, because they're doing the same mistake they did in 1967. Faced with the military embargo, their response, we don't need the world, we'll do everything on our own, we'll build everything. And now, and not only this, they're planning to build all these weapons when their best engineers, their best technological experts, their best professors have left the country. So this is a connection, I think, that we see between the military embargo and the expanding military embargo that we see, and the collapse of the Israeli economy.